Good afternoon and welcome to the weekly livestock market update on Brownfield. I'm Brownfield anchor reporter Brent Barnett, and I'm filling in today for Megan Grebner. And we're joined as always by University of Missouri's Scott Brown. Happy Friday, Scott. How are you doing today?
I am doing good, Brent. Thanks for filling in for Megan today.
Yeah, no problem at all. Always great to catch up with you. And I tell you what, it just seems like this month is already flying by. I mean, NAFB is coming up next week as we speak, and I mean, Thanksgiving will be here before you know it.
I know it seems like these weeks click off faster and faster.
Well, let's take a look at some of the issues we'll be talking about this week. Supply and demand report from USDA. That's something we'll touch on. Monthly trade data and even some consumer sentiment. But first, let's recap what happened in the markets this week.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to have this discussion this week, Brent. It hasn't been a very good week for livestock markets generally. If we start on the cattle side this week, live fed cattle were down about $4.25 on the week. Those feeder cattle markets were generally 1 to 5 lower. Some heifers up to $10 lower this week. Futures markets down again this week on the cattle side. December live cattle futures contract down $9.55, and that January feeder contract lost nearly $13.50 this week. Choice box beef prices were also lower this week, down $4.70. Chucks and briskets were down fairly hard in those components of that choice box beef price. On the hog side, cash barrels and gilts were virtually unchanged this week, and the December lean hog futures contract was also just up about 20 cents on the week. The pork cutout value gained $1.70. That was really driven by what was stronger bellies this week.
And I noticed in the direct cash cattle trade that it seemed like the bulk of the sales this week came on Thursday.
That's right, came on Thursday and came lower on Thursday this week. So we certainly continue to see these cattle markets struggle, I think, with where prices should be, and we keep coming off of those records that we would have seen a few weeks ago.
Let's talk slaughter, Scott. What does this week's slaughter run look like?
Yeah, so USDA tells us for the week ending November 11th, a run of 618,000 head of cattle this week. That's 14,000 head less than what we ran last week, and 52,000 head less than what we ran a year ago. On the hog side, a lighter run this week, 2.576 million head of hogs this week, down 95,000 head from the bigger run last week. But that's still 75,000 head above where we were a year ago.
Yeah, what do you make of that on the year to date changes?
So we continue to see fewer cattle. So year-to-date cattle slaughter is down 4.7%, and on the hog side, we're up 1.5% in terms of hog slaughter year to date.
Well, like you said, the USDA did release its monthly supply and demand report this week. Are there any big changes on the livestock side this month?
So not a lot of changes to where we set for 2023, which is probably not that uncommon given we're 11 months into the year here already. But for 2024, USDA did make some changes on the production side. So beef production up nearly a half a billion pounds, or a little more than a half a billion pounds this month relative to where they were last month. That still leaves us 4.2% below where 2023 was. They also reduced chicken production nearly a half a billion pounds this month relative to last month. That would put 2024 chicken production up about 1%. On the price side, not a lot of changes. Fed cattle prices still unchanged at $1.85 for an annual average for 2024. Took another dollar off the barrel on gilt prices, which probably doesn't bode well for profitability on the hog side if that unfolds in 2024.
Overall, what were your main takeaways, I guess, in general from the report, Scott? Were there any surprises at all?
Not really big surprises. Generally I say more of the same as we look ahead for 2024. For cattle, that's probably positive. For hogs, that's probably not so positive. USDA did find some more corn yield this month and lowered their corn price for the 23-24 year by about 10 cents. But I don't know if any of those were big changes this month.
Well, let's turn our attention here to the monthly trade report. What were some of the highlights when we look at beef and pork exports this month?
Yeah, I think when we look at the beef side, we can talk about the less positive piece of that report this month. Beef exports for September of 2023 came in at about 232 million pounds. That was down almost 50 million pounds from where we were uh, last year at this time. And when you start looking at the individual countries, so China down, South Korea down, Japan down, uh, two countries next that were up, Mexico and Canada, both up slightly in September of this year relative to a year ago. Everybody else, all those other countries, were also down September this year relative to a year ago. Look at year to date. We're down about 400 million pounds in terms of beef exports. That's 14.2%. It's probably not surprising we're down year to date, just given the higher prices that we're running. When you look at the import side of the equation, we don't talk about this very often, but I think now is going to be the time. We imported 313 million pounds of beef in the United States in September of 2023, up about 50 million pounds. So imports up year to date, almost 200 million pounds. So not only are we seeing less exports, but some more imports coming in at these prices. On the pork side, pork exports 512 million pounds for September 2023, just down slightly, about 4 million pounds relative to where we were a year ago. Year to date, we're still up 331 million pounds. Don't want to forget Mexico has been important to this more positive picture. For September, up about 21 million pounds, up 144 million pounds year to date, really leading. And then I'll say, I think the other thing we're seeing on the pork side is a lot of these other smaller countries showing a lot of growth. When you take out Mexico, Japan, Canada, South Korea, and China, everybody else was up 13 million pounds in September, and they're up almost 15% year to date, Brent, in terms of those other countries.
That was leading right into my next question, Scott. I was going to follow up here and just ask, are there any emerging markets that we should be paying attention to heading into next year?
So I think from the pork side in particular, some of those Central American countries I think have certainly been important. I'm not sure there's one that's the home run country, if you will, but this investment across a lot of newer countries in the trade game. I give the pork industry a lot of credit for what I believe is a little bit of risk management strategy here. Of I don't have all my eggs in one basket like maybe the soybean industry did with China a few years ago. So I have a little bit of chance to, if I lose one country in particular, to see the others pick up the slack. So I think that's one of the important things that we'll continue to be focused on in the months ahead.
Scott, consumer sentiment is also out this week. What does this week's report mean for meat demand?
You just look at it at face value and you get a little worried. So 4 consecutive months of lower consumer sentiment index. The November numbers came in down 5.3% from where we were in October. Both the current situation as well as the expectations components were lower this month. Current was down 6.9 relative to October, and the expectations component was down 4%. I think consumers worried about income generally as interest rates continue to march higher. Inflation continues to be front and center. I think the war in Gaza, as well as what's going on between Ukraine and Russia, continue to weigh on consumer sentiment.
Let's look ahead here as we wind down. What reports are coming up that we need to be focusing on?
So big report next week, Brent. We're going to get cattle on feed next Friday, and after what was the more than 6% increase in placements for September, I'm sure a lot of folks are going to be curious to see what we get out of next week's report in terms of October placements. We'll also get a little flavor of retail prices early next week to see what's happening on the demand side.
Scott, always good to catch up with you. Thanks for the updates here on the show this week.
Brent, thanks a lot.
Again, that's University of Missouri's Scott Brown. And to have our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email inbox every Saturday, just go to brownfieldagnews.com. You can also submit some questions and comments. And for a rundown of what happens every day in the commodity markets, make sure you check out the Market Minute from John Perkins. Have a great weekend, and thanks a lot for joining us here this week. I'm Brent Barnett with Brownfield.